My name is Jeanette Ortiz, Chair of the Anne Arundel County Police Accountability Board. This is the February meeting of the board, first one of 2024. So Happy New Year, even though we're 2 months in. I would like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. And first on our agenda is approval of the minutes. The audio recording of the December 18 meeting of the PAB will serve as the minutes for that meeting. At the December meeting, the board received updates from the county law enforcement agencies. As required by law, they are required to update the board on a quarterly basis. And we approved the final PAB annual report. So it's the second report of the PAB. That is also required in accordance with state law. And we received updates from the Office of Police Accountability. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the December meeting of the board?
Aye.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, great. So the meeting minutes for December 18th are approved. Next on our agenda is the public comment period. The board will now accept public comment, and I just want to share a few friendly reminders. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to provide public comment. A speaker representing an organization shall have 5 minutes to provide public comment, and a timer will be used to keep time. Once the buzzer sounds, please wrap up your comments. Any remaining time may not be allocated to another speaker. We ask that comments remain civil and appropriate for the various audiences that may be watching. The board cannot discuss any specific cases, and it's also not the practice of the board to engage in back and forth with speakers. So we'll begin with public comment. We have Devin Maxwell signed up in advance. Is there Devin Maxwell in the audience?
I don't see anybody by that name in the attendees.
Okay, I don't see that either. Is there anyone else who did not sign up in advance who would like to provide public comment? Just looking here, I don't see anyone. All right, well, if Mr. Maxwell pops in a little bit later, I think we can give him a few minutes to give his public comments since he did sign up in advance. All right, so now we will go to, I lost the agenda. I think it's updates from the Office of Police Accountability is next. Is that next on the agenda?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just wanted to give you a quick update what the ACC's been up to. So since February 12th of this year, they've heard 51 cases, which totals 75 officers are involved for a total of 123 total charges. So that's as of February 12th. They've had some meetings since then, and they have another meeting tomorrow. Just want to let you know that they've still been busy in 2024. I spoke to Jeanette last week, and she wanted me to update you all on certain legislative bills that are in session right now. So I wanted to just go over 4 of them just briefly. The first bill that's going to be heard, I believe is tomorrow at 1 p.m. is HB 0973. And that bill is the House Bill 0973. They're asking to add positive community feedback to the list of records that are not considered personal records for certain purposes. So this is for the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission to develop a process where citizens can submit positive community engagement and feedback. There's another bill, House Bill 0533, which is in connection to Senate Bill 0621. The Senate hearing has already occurred. It occurred last week, but the House bill is going to be heard tomorrow as well at 1 p.m. And this is a big one. This is, again, the senators are trying to have the PAB have subpoena and investigative powers. So Senator Jill Carter had brought her motion to the floor last week and was, asked questions from the different senators about her bill. I believe Senator Malcolm Ruff sponsoring this House bill. Again, that'll be heard tomorrow. And you can watch these if you're interested on the judiciary website, which you're able to do so. But this bill is, they had the Baltimore City Office of Equity, I think Dana Moore, she testified in support of the bill. Obviously, the FOP, state FOP testified in against the bill. But essentially, they're wanting the PAB to have investigative powers and subpoena powers in addition to what the ACC already has. So we're definitely going to be taking a look and watching the outcome of that bill. So I just want to keep you guys posted with that. There is another bill, House Bill 0188, that's requiring law enforcement agencies to file administrative charges arising out of an investigation of alleged police misconduct that's not required to be sent to the ACC within 1 year. So obviously we know cases going to the ACC have a 1 year and a day deadline, but now there's a bill on the floor that charges that don't go to the ACC also need to have that deadline. So I'll be watching that one as well. Even though it does not affect the ACC, the PAB would be interested in those kind of cases. And then the last one, there's House Bill 8 and Senate Bill 48. They're basically trying to, there's an issue with police all around the state and in the nation. There's a shortage of police officers. So there's a bill on the floor trying to not reduce or relax the standards, but they want to say, look, if you're, they want to remove the citizenship requirements to people who are permanent legal residents. They also want to look at people who are honorably discharged, are a veteran, or a current member of the Army National Guard or the Air National Guard. They're trying, to open up the field, the pool of people who can become police officers. They had a hearing on that, I believe, earlier in February. So I'll be keeping an eye on that as well. Again, it does not affect really the PAB, but obviously, what officers are being, hired may down the line affect what types of cases we're seeing. So, and those are only 4 bills that I'm really keeping my eye on right now. There's other bills out there, the odor of marijuana, other, criminal cases for public safety, but it wasn't really on point to the PAB, but I still am watching the odor of marijuana one. But that's all I have for today, Madam Chair. If anybody has any questions, hopefully I can answer them.
Thank you so much for that update. That was very helpful. Are there any questions for Ms. Panda?
I do. The first bill that you read about positive feedback process. Can you tell me a little more? What are they asking for?
That and I made sure I cut and paste the summary to make sure I'm not missing anything. So I'm just going to read the summary. So they want to add positive community feedback to the list of records that are not considered personnel records for certain purposes. They want to require the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission to develop a process for citizens to submit positive community feedback, requiring each law enforcement agency to adopt the Uniform Citizen Positive Community Feedback process. And they want to require the law enforcement agency to maintain those records that are subject to police inspection. I think they're doing that. Obviously, we get to follow complaints of alleged police misconduct. They want to also see, are we getting positive feedback from the community? And let's keep a record of those as well.
Got it. Yep. Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you. And as Moya mentioned, you can definitely find this information. This is like my life right now. I do legislative work for a living. So I'm in Annapolis every day, and I also have been tracking these bills. But you can go to the Maryland General Assembly website, and we can share a link if you'd like, and links to those bill pages if that's helpful. Go back and watch the hearing, see if there are any amendments proposed or anything else you might be interested in. So that's a really good resource. Way back in the day when I started, none of that was available online almost 20 years ago. So anyway, but thank you. That was incredibly helpful, and we appreciate the feedback. All right, I've found my agenda amongst all my tabs here. If there are no more questions for Ms. Panda, we will move on to the next agenda item. And so as folks may know, we've been inviting organizations in the community to come speak before the board and share their perspective on police reform in the county. And so in keeping with that, we asked the ACLU and also the Maryland and Council of African American Leaders to speak with us today. And so we have Amy Cruz with the ACLU. Welcome, Amy. And we asked, for some specific, information. We obviously look forward to hearing, the ACLU perspective on police reform in Anne Arundel County, around the state, and particularly in Anne Arundel, since that's our jurisdiction, and hear more about, the ACLU's involvement with police reform efforts, which I'm sure, precede the police reform legislation that passed a few years ago. And then, what you've observed since the passage of the 2021 law, and challenges that still persist, and really anything that you think is relevant for the work of the board and the PAB and the ACC and the work that we're doing on police reform. And we've allocated 15 minutes. So the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, everybody, for having me. It's good to see everyone, and I'm excited to be sharing the stage with my friend and best friend of the ACLUs, the Honorable Carl Snowden, who I've been working with now for at least 23 years. So it's great to be here with you all. And I've spoke to you all before, and I usually am wearing both the hats of ACLU, and then, well, I guess ACLU and the Anne Arundel County Police Accountability Coalition, and then myself as a resident. Today, I'm really going to just wear the ACLU hat because that's who was invited. So thank you for inviting me. I'm going to share a little bit about myself individually. I work at the ACLU of Maryland in the legal department. I'm not a lawyer, but I have worked with our lawyers on a number of litigation projects. And so primarily what I do in those cases is I'm the investigator on the case. And so I will gather all the facts and then be the client contact throughout the duration of the case. And similarly, I advocate for our clients in the casework, and I work with impacted families who want to get involved in our policy work as well. So that's kind of my role in the legal department. I also wear some other hats in the voting rights space and in our Know Your Rights training program. So I do that as well. But related to police accountability, I may have mentioned this to you all before, but I am the representative of the ACLU on the Baltimore City Civilian Review Board. I've been on the Civilian Review Board for 8 years. I've seen a whole lot in that role, ups and downs and all arounds. And I've also been a member of NACOL for probably about 5 years. And then more recently, I joined an organization called the National Association of Legal Investigators. And also on the investigator front, I have been connected with some of you all I know are involved in NACOL, but NACOL also has a subgroup for investigators. And so I've joined their meetings when I can. And that's been a really great resource in terms of what investigations look like across the country in police accountability and police oversight units. So, and then finally, I'm a resident of Anne Arundel County, Annapolis in particular. And so I have a vested interest in police accountability here in our county. So a little bit about the ACLU's background. I mean, I could spend way more than 15 minutes telling you all about the ACLU of Maryland's cases involving police related things in Maryland, but just more recent developments that we championed over the last few years include the repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which really was an important step that paved the way to the Maryland Police Accountability Act. And just in case you don't know this, the Maryland was one of the first states to have a Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, and also had the most expansive in terms of lots of protections for officers that infringed on rights of individuals who are impacted by police misconduct. So we did a lot of work on repealing LEOBR, and we worked on the Anton's Law and championed that. That actually came on our radar, I want to say more than 10 years ago, and Carl may remember this, but we received a call. I actually met this woman at an event, and then she called us after. a woman on the Lower Eastern Shore who had received a phone call from a Maryland State Police trooper, and it went to her voicemail. She was a potential witness in a case, and he left a message, a voicemail on her phone, and thought he hung up, but he didn't, and then proceeded to have a conversation with his fellow trooper and referred to her as the N-word on her voicemail. So she called us, she filed a MPIA, Maryland Public Information Act request to get, oh, I'm sorry, she filed a complaint, and then she months later received a letter that said, thank you for your complaint, we closed it, or like it's been resolved or something vague like that. So that's when, I think that's the point at which she reached out to us. And so we assisted her in filing an MPIA, a Maryland Public Information Act request, to get more information about what they did. So she was a Black woman on the Lower Eastern Shore who had just filed a complaint against a police officer, had given all of her information, her address, everything is out there. And yet she has literally no idea, is this person still a police officer? Did anything happen? And so they told her and stuck by their position that she did not have the right to get the internal affairs file, even though she was the one who initiated it and filed the complaint. And that was the beginning of many, many, many years that then ended up being named after Anton Black. And so some of these fights are long fights. And I guess that's a little bit of how I feel about where we are right now with police accountability and the setup, but I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. So Anton's Law, we worked a lot on. And then, of course, defending the Baltimore Civilian Review Board, there have been some attempts to, stifle the work of the CRB in the past. And so we work closely with them on that. And then we were really involved in banning searches based on the smell of marijuana most recently. And there's a lot more, but that's kind of just to give you a sense of the policy type work that we do. And then we've just had lots of lawsuits across the state as well on all kinds of everything from defending police officers who are victims of discrimination within their force to patterns and practices that police departments engage in. Our current priority, though, and what I do want to spend some time talking about, and what Director Panda was just talking about, the second or third bill she mentioned, I have it here, House Bill 533, which is giving investigatory authority to you all, the PAB, as well as PABs across the state. So I definitely want to talk, I'm very passionate about this, and you'll understand why in a second. But as you know, so many acronyms, the Maryland Police Accountability Act of 2021 established this current framework that we have with PABs, ACCs, and trial boards. The purpose of this, we can argue, and we are continuing to argue about, what the law itself ended up meaning or intending. But the purpose of why we even started talking about needing an MPAA, if you will, is why we needed this reform, was to set up a system that we had an external community controlled oversight mechanism. And this really was a response to a call after years of, uprising after Freddie Gray, and then similar protests and outrage and demands after George Floyd, and obviously Breonna Taylor and others in that time frame. And the communities across Maryland were demanding more accountability. And so that was obviously the point of it. So the current system, though, has PABs and ACCs relying entirely on the investigations conducted by the police department. So as an investigator myself, I find this so problematic in so many ways. First of all, investigators should be impartial, fact-finding only. There shouldn't be huge differences in the way different investigators investigate a case. But that's the should, but that isn't the reality. The quality of investigations really vary. But what we have seen at the Civilian Review Board in Baltimore City. So Baltimore City is the only place we can go to and say, hey, what does the difference look like? Because you've seen both. You've seen what, in the exact same case, what did the police department find and what did the independent investigator find? And it is different. It is very different. And that's for a few reasons. I do think that implicit bias, and I don't even want to say implicit bias seems very catchphrasey right now. There's all kinds of bias that comes in. And especially if you are working for the police department and you are investigating the police department and the police department is the one that pays your bills, I feel like it's really hard to say that there isn't some bias there. And I don't know if you heard the news most recently, but one of the officers who was involved in the death of Freddie Gray has now been promoted to be the head of the Public Integrity Bureau, which is their internal affairs department. So I have a hard time thinking that officers who themselves have been investigated may not have their own agenda when it comes to that. Of course, we have all have our own agendas, but so there's this one idea of police and, policing themselves. But the other thing is that we've seen both, and like we've seen at the ACLU, but then also at the CRB, that independent investigators are able to reach witnesses and get information that police officers can't get or don't get because of trust issues, because of fear, other things like that. So another part of it is that that independent investigators are often able to be trusted more by witnesses, victims, et cetera, and they're more likely to cooperate. So that's another reason that independent investigators will result in a different type of investigation. So currently we have the system where all of it is based on that. And I know that there is a place in the law that allows the ACC to investigate further, or I think ask for them to investigate further or find certain things. But I would just say that does not at all replace an independent investigation. And investigations really do hinge on what questions are asking, what you're not asking, even the way that you're taking notes, even the way that you're little subtle, like what you're not writing down and what you are writing down. And I could nerd out about this because it's something I'm really passionate about, is the way that implicit bias, equity issues can affect even the quality of your investigations. And I've developed over my career too. I would probably not even want to see like some of the things I may or may not have done like 20 years ago, not recognizing what I thought was reliable or not unreliable or questionable or doubtful, that sort of thing. So the investigations piece is really important, that that the basis of PAB and ACC work is that you're able to look at independent investigations and deploy them and decide on your own what needs to be investigated and that sort of thing. In Baltimore, the CRB does not investigate every single case that comes before them. They first decide, do we want to investigate that, or are we okay leaving that to the internal affairs, and then we'll review their investigations. Most of the time they do want to investigate themselves, but there are some rare, kinds of cases where it either seems really clear or it seems, maybe really frivolous or something along those lines, where they've decided to not spend their resources to investigate them. So there's a lot of resources out there for our legislators and then you all as advocates. And honestly, we need you all to speak up when you're ready and if you're aligned, to talk about what you all need to make this more aligned with what the point of the Police Accountability Act, meaning what the call for the Police Accountability Act was, and what you all need to operate as a community oversight agency, and one that can issue subpoenas and do investigations. So that bill again tomorrow, I highly encourage you to listen in if you can. or watch the recording after, but it's at 1 p.m., which doesn't always mean 1 p.m. Those of you in the policy, everyone's nodding their head. If you're not used to that, sometimes your bill gets called at 5 p.m. But the set of hearings starts at 1 p.m. and it's 533. And we will have people from across the state, including lots of people who have experience with the Civilian Review Board who will testify in favor of this. And so I urge everybody to listen in on that. And I do have a one-pager I can put in the chat for you all, or email. What do you prefer?
Email's best so that we can make sure that it's available publicly.
Great. Okay. So I will send that to you, Ms. Rogers. Is that the best way to get it around?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. And then I'll also put my contact information in that as well. But that was a lot in a little presentation. So I definitely want to see if anybody had any questions.
Thank you so much. You were like right on time for that. It was super helpful to have that background information. I see Sarah's hand up, and if anyone else has any questions, please raise your hands and I will make sure I call on you. Thank you, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you. That was really good. Let me put my hand down if I can. Okay, so a little insight and then a question if you don't mind. So I have the unique position of being on the PAB and the ACC. I also have the unique position of being a seasoned investigator for 25 years. So I've been doing investigations for 25 years. I love my job. I love investigating. I want to tell you that I give 10 to 20 hours a week to the ACC reviewing cases. This is largely a volunteer job, plus the time I give to the PAB. I think it's great work. I think we're doing great things. I think there's a ton of work to do. There's a ton of work to be done. So I'm supporting what you're doing. I think I think the opportunity is great. I think the reform is great. I'm behind all of it. My concern with the investigatory power or the investigatory ability, my honest concern is I work 40 to 50 hours a week. This is the Sarah problem. I'm fully aware of that. I have a family of 4. I have an active personal life, and everybody on the screen is not an investigator, right? I think I'm the only one that I'm looking at that, well, except for Dr. Ashworth. She has some experience that does investigations, and Cedric, I think, has too. And my other partners that couldn't make it tonight, they're not trained investigators. So you have to train somebody, because Amy, you and I have a skill set that I feel like is very similar. We could be friends somewhere. We have an ability to look at the facts and interpret them. And I've spent a lot of time in the first year of the ACC and the PAB answering questions about investigations. My time is up. I'm getting ready to come off of both teams. Somebody new is coming on. So I guess my question is, have you considered any method for advocating for funding? Because you really are asking people to step up to these positions and volunteer. And it's 10 to 20 hours that I love to volunteer, but it's 10 to 20 hours that I'm giving to I'm taking away from my very young family. And it's work. I'm essentially giving the county for 2 years a job that I get paid well to do Monday through Friday from 7:30 to 5.
Thank you so much for that question, because I did not clarify that. I did not mean at all that the actual members of the boards or the ACC would do the investigations themselves. The idea is that there would be a staff of investigators. And so again, you can look to Baltimore, and we have some sense of scale of how many investigators you need to carry a certain caseload. But that this would be paid. So of course, yes, funding is imperative. And we've also been a champion of some of the funding suggestions that NACOL puts out, which is something like 2 to 5% of what the police department's budget is. And I think that could cover what Anne Arundel County needs, especially and probably everywhere else in terms of investigator staff.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Amy. I saw Cedric's hand next.
Yeah, just a quick question for Amy and maybe Mr. Snowden. Just say all the proposed legislation does not pass. What does success look like for the PAB right now if we continue forward as is? What measurements how do we determine what is successful for the PAB right now as it is? Can you give us any guidance on that?
Well, my quick response would be, I won't be surprised if it doesn't pass this year. Hopefully it'll pass by next year. I think success would be for you all to continue to develop as experts, as civilian oversight experts who can help shape policy next year and beyond, so that you all can be testifying, so you all can be talking to our legislators and say, you know, this is what we know from the PAB ACC side, and this is what we need. We need funding. We need, because hearing from you all is going to be worth its weight in gold compared to advocacy organization like ours, and unfortunately, probably individual residents. So I just think that that's the victory.
Thanks, Amy. And then I saw Moya's hand up.
Thank you, Amy. It was such a great presentation. As I was watching the hearing for Senator Carter's bill last week, some of the senators had questions about how many subpoenas would be issued. And I think the answer that came back from the director was it was only 2 so far. Do you have any insight to assuage people's concerns that's going to be 50, 100 subpoenas issued by the PABs if they were to be authorized to have that power?
Yeah, I mean, I think in Baltimore City, again, this is the place that we can look to just because it's had these powers. We have actually had a pretty good relationship with the police department in terms of sharing records and getting the information that we need. They have really streamlined the sharing of body-worn camera videos and some other things. And they have more recently made it very easy to get so they'll get the rest of their internal affairs file. So what the process is now with the CRB is if they sustain a complaint, at that point, they'll get the rest of the record, so priors, et cetera. And then they use that similar to how the police would in their internal affairs process to look at the matrix. Because before they were giving us that, and then it was like, well, how are we going to use a matrix if we don't know if this is their 10th time doing it or their first time doing it? And so, yeah, so the other thing is that I think there's this, you know, some who lobby against police reform will act like there's these really unreasonable, you know, people on the side of police accountability. And we now have, you know, 8 years of recordings of meetings at the Civilian Review Board that will show that the Civilian Review Board is made up of residents of Baltimore City who are very reasonable people, who aren't going to give you 50 subpoenas all at once, who are not going to issue that, who are going to try to find a resolution, and also who sees a frivolous complaint or a lie or whatever, if that's what it is. And they also will get outraged about police misconduct, you know, both sides. So yes, I think Baltimore City is an example of a place where you can see that that is not abused, where the independent investigations doesn't get in the way of anything. And so, you know, there may be, could there be a PAB that goes wild? I mean, maybe, but I think that's going to correct itself right away, because that's, if you can't trust the PAB, you know, the PAB, if you can't trust your own PAB, then that's going to get corrected right away too.
Any other questions? Okay, I
Thank
have
you so much for your
I have a
time.
couple of questions. Yeah. So in looking, so I was just wondering, I have a couple of questions. So first, what was the thought process behind requesting that the PAB have subpoena and investigatory powers versus an ACC? Who is, you know, the ACCs are currently reviewing the investigations and making recommendations as to
Right.
any, you know, discipline or not, or lack, or no discipline. So what was the thought process behind that?
Yeah, I think the thought process came out of needing a body that was civilian led, that was accepting. So you all accept, you're the first point at which the complaints come. but then they go over there to be reviewed, right? Which to me is a little bit awkward. All of this is like a little awkward in the way that it was designed. But the idea would be that the PAB would be more like the fact finder, the collector and kind of fact finder of the complaints. And then the ACC would still be the decision-making body, which would have, you know, slightly less transparency in terms of, not transparency, but, you know, not as open to the public because of what's being discussed and that sort of thing. But that the PAB would be like the first part of what the like Baltimore Civilian Review Board does, where you accept cases, you decide whether or not to investigate them. You're more, and maybe I actually don't know how involved you all are on all of the individual cases, but you do have more exposure to those to identify the patterns, to say all of a sudden we're getting all these taser complaints, or all of a sudden I'm noticing that this one region is getting all these complaints. So you all would be more issue spotters. So maybe there would be some more sharing between ACC and PAB, but what I confess to not know is how much you all see the individual complaints, and or whether you're just like this vessel to get them over to the ACC.
Thank you. That was helpful. And then my next question is, so looking at House Bill 533, it's a very short bill. It's very general, and the fiscal note is also very general, right? There's nothing about, you know, to Sarah's point, it doesn't specify that the PAB can hire investigators, that they will be funded to hire investigators. So I think that's probably some, you know, concerns that you heard from Sarah. I know that would be like concerning for me and maybe for others. So has there been any conversation about maybe adding a little bit more detail to proposed legislation to the law to make that clear? Because I feel like if that was clarified in the statutory language, you know, perhaps you might get folks that would be more open to it versus the concern of like, oh my goodness, now we have to be investigators and it's going to take so much, you know, of our time, or I don't have the proper training or experience or expertise, et cetera. Is that something that you or at least the ACLU has thought of perhaps clarifying that in legislation?
Yeah, I mean, I have an answer. I'm not with the policy team, so I definitely can't, I'm not an expert on all the considerations in the way that the bill was drafted. But I want to first say thank you for raising that, because I had never thought of it that way, like that concerns could come from, I mean, I understand concerns can come from vagueness. I'm concerned about vagueness all the time, but that in this particular instance, I think the plan was that we're simply trying to clarify what you all have probably heard us and the local coalition talk about for a long time, which is that the law did not preclude this anyway. And that the law would have allowed for this anyway, but we clearly are not winning that argument. And so that a law that would say that you could, but not that you have to, would also allow for, we have, is it 24 counties in a city or 24 counties including
23 in the city.
in the city? It's a lot of PABs, and every county is very, very different. And so to do a mandated bill where we're mandating this everywhere felt number one, like something that probably wouldn't pass right now. And number two, you know, may not be necessary everywhere. And so I think that was why it's more general, is just to allow it. And then we can, hopefully, we have a couple of places like Prince George's County PAB that wants it. And so there are some places that will do it immediately. They will hire investigators immediately. And then other counties can look and say, oh, look what they're doing. And I think a lot of this, it helps to look at other places, you know, and see how they're doing it. And so I think that was the thinking, but I will definitely pass along that thought process and that concern, because I think that's real. And I think there's a way that we could, maybe even through messaging, just explain why it's not a fully funded mandated type of bill.
Yeah, no, thank you. I definitely, I think I appreciate that you will share that with your policy folks. I mean, I've been doing policy and regs, and I've written many a state law in my past life. And so, you know, I think that if there was even any language that folks may consider to provide a little bit more of that clarification, that may result in perhaps support from PABs, or at least more neutral versus folks maybe hesitating or concerning or not, being concerned about what they're seeing and what that means around the language and the law. So that's definitely something, I would recommend for the ACLU and others to think about, like, what could be some language to more clearly state sort of your vision of, without making it a mandate, because I think the authorizing language is helpful too, right? You're not mandating it. And so therefore the counties that could implement it, are interested in implementing, are doing it because they want to. And so hopefully in, the best way possible versus being forced. So that was my question.
Yeah, I will
Anybody-
definitely pass that along, and I'll also
Mhm.
remind you all that you can always testify or talk to your legislators, like be favorable with amendments or that sort of thing. So you could say, I support the idea of this, but I'm really concerned about, like as Sarah said, we're already spending, this is a huge endeavor. And so we would definitely need more money to make it happen. And any of your concerns could be shared, but I think just having that dialogue with the legislators would be really helpful.
And then my other food for thought is, have you thought about maybe making it a pilot program, right? So like if Prince George's is interested in doing it in another jurisdiction, like the General Assembly really likes pilot programs sometimes, that may be a way where it makes it a little bit easier to do dedicated funding, because it's like you have maybe 3 or 4 jurisdictions that are already interested. They know what they're going to need versus the legislature saying like, well, we don't even know if anyone's going to implement it and we don't necessarily have interest. So if you have a Prince George's or another county that are interested, that might be a way to start that process. Just a
Yeah,
thought.
I think Prince George's County, I think there was already talks of that happening. There was some discussion about whether or not they just wanted to go local and get the local law to do that. And then that would strengthen the state to do it, either to do it just for them or to do it for statewide. I think Baltimore City, we're definitely going to see some changes that are going to move in that direction. And so if Anne Arundel County PAB wants to be in such a pilot, I think that would be really powerful to show that we have a few counties that where they're PABs and ACC want this and they're willing to, be one of the, and have our legislators champion it would be great too.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much. That was really informative and helpful. Really appreciate you taking the time this evening to be with us. And you are obviously welcome to stay, but you don't have to. And then I see Mr. Carl Snowden. We had Baron Bell, but will you be speaking on behalf of the Caucus of African American Leaders this evening?
Yes, first, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
I wanted just to share something, and Cedric, I definitely want to answer your question. And part of my presentation, think I'll be able to do that. First, I want to thank you for the invitation and sort of share a perspective that may be a little different than some of you've had. Some of you may be aware that I was the first civil rights director for the Office of the Maryland Attorney General. So I kind of know things about how police departments operate, and I've gotten to learn a lot over the years. But before I give some really what I hope to be constructive recommendations, I want to set the context. I recently became a grandfather, and that may seem strange to you that I bring that subject up. But if you happen to have a grandchild, as I do, who's 10 years old, here is what my grandchild and others have seen in their short life expansion. In 2014, Tamar Rice, 12 years old, was murdered by police officers in Cleveland, Ohio. Trayvon Martin was 17 years old and he was shot and murdered in Florida. Michael Brown, 18 years old, murdered in Ferguson. McDonald, 19 years old, murdered in Chicago. Antoine Black, murdered in Maryland. Freddie Gray, 25 years old, murdered. Deanna Taylor, murdered. And at 9 years old, my grandchild, like many others, saw George Floyd murdered. 9 minutes and 46 seconds. This decade has really underscored the need, I believe, for real police reform. And it's very difficult to tell you that there are many people who happen to be people of color who lose their sons, their daughters, their grandchildren. And quite honestly, we have a system that have not worked over the years. So PAB becomes this hope that we can help change what has been a very unfortunate process. One of the things we thought through the Caucus of African American Leaders we have launched, and we particularly and specifically called on the PAB to adopt this proposal. Those of you who are able to, please Google George Floyd Transparency Project. George Floyd Transparency Project. And what you will discover is that in 2023, we launched the George Floyd Transparency Project. It's a simple software that gives people an opportunity who have encounters with the police, good and bad, to be able to report them. So many things that happen go unreported, don't get the sunlight. So our goal here was to create this system that any citizen in Anne Arundel County could access and then share their experiences of police, be a way of gathering data. If you have a police department of 800 plus officers, and through this process, you discover that there are police officers who constantly are having bad encounters with people of color, it's a way of tracing it. We have to have the data. And what I'm looking for this particular PAB to be is the inquisitors, to ask the questions that you're in a position to ask that no one else will be able to ask. To not assume that the story you are told by the police, as nice as it might sound, is accurate. And there are two events that have happened very recently in Anne Arundel County. Both of them I must tell you, I find absolutely disgusting because I think it says so much about why the PAB is needed. One of them involves somebody that you can Google. It's all public information. The cases have been adjudicated, so there's no reason we can't discuss it. One was a captain named Jeffrey Silverman, who was on the Anne Arundel County Police Department for 27 years. In the Capital newspaper, there was this public expose, 2022, where women came forward and said they had been the victim of sexual harassment. The news article documented the fact that a woman who was a subordinate to this captain, she said was forced to have sex with him. And an internal investigation was launched as the Capitol was able to demonstrate. There's no question that this person had been involved in despicable behavior. An investigation is launched, and he gets to walk away with not a single problem, because under the current system, the minute he retired, the investigation was closed. Nothing was said. He was able to continue to earn his pension for the rest of his life. He could even, if he wanted to, go back into law enforcement, because there was nothing on his record that showed his behavior. I thought that was deplorable. What made it even more deplorable to me is that all of these female officers made it crystal clear that they felt they had no support within the police department. This guy was untouchable. Nowhere in that article that was publicized will you find a single statement from the police chief condemning the behavior. Not a word. I just found that despicable. There was no public investigation called in to look into this. There was no discussion what reforms were necessary to ensure that women who work for the Anne Arundel County Police Department would not be subject to this. It's a very public case. It's one that the entire county should be ashamed of. This is not something that happened 20 years ago. When you Google Captain Jeffrey Silverman, you'll see the front page news story that appeared in the Sunday Capital. Now, in the PAB, if it adopts the George Floyd Transparency Project, women who may have want to be able to report the behavior of this officer could have done it in an anonymous way where that behavior perhaps could have been nipped in the bud. So I'm hoping that you consider strongly to adopt this George Floyd Transparency Project, which has been in operation since August of this year, where we've been able to gather data. The other case that I wanted to bring to your attention, and again, remember, people read and they see. The insurrection that occurred, and what I'm about to tell you is you need to know, there was an insurrection that we all know that occurred on January 6th. Across the country, police departments began to examine whether police officers had locally participated in that insurrection. It turns out that Anne Arundel County had a police officer that went to Washington, D.C., that participated in that insurrection. And a Black police officer who was so outraged that her colleague would be engaged in this activity wrote on her Facebook page that she thought that anybody who was involved in the insurrection should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. The investigation is launched initially against the white police officer who went to Washington, D.C. and participated in insurrection, and he was cleared of all charges. The statement was that he was exercising his constitutional right to go and participate in this demonstration. Unbeknownst to most of you sitting on this board, the Black woman who had merely expressed her freedom of speech in a Facebook posting was fired. It's just inexcusable. But it also says to people who happen to be police officers, keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything, because you could be the victim, as this woman was, of losing your job. The officer who went to Washington, D.C., was cleared of these particular charges, was never identified publicly, but this was this report that was put out by the police chief saying they had initiated this investigation and never explained how they were able to determine that he was not, quote, involved in insurrection, that he merely showed up in Washington, D.C. Where other police departments around the country, because they had access to the security coverage, was able to identify police officers who had been involved in insurrection, and many of them were terminated because of the perspective that if he or she was going to Washington, D.C., these same police officers were coming back to their respective police departments. For the last 3 years, the FBI director, Ray, all this is public information, has said that domestic terrorism is the greatest threat to our tranquility. And the FBI director has made 2 recommendations. One, that people who harbor racist views are joining police departments and the military across the country. And his recommendation is that there should be a screening to ensure that police officers with certain ideologies are not being brought into local police departments where they're in a position to do all kinds of things. All of that recommendation has been made. I've seen no evidence locally that we've done anything differently to ensure that police officers who may be harboring these kind of views are vetted. In fact, because the FBI director had been saying this for not the last year, but for the last 5 years. We have no way of knowing whether people who harbor that view have already been hired by the police department. The recommendation was that people needed to look very carefully within those institutions, the military and local police departments. And to the military credit, they have been very good at going back, vetting departments, and having military people be required to leave the department, to leave the military. We're living in some perilous times, so I think the role that the PAB plays is vital, and I think it's important that you use the power that's been given to you to make it crystal clear that the kind of conduct in the past will not be tolerated. And so one of the things that I think we can do that is very, very clear, when we launched this George Floyd Transparency Project, members of the PAB was quoted as saying, "You welcome it, you look forward to collaborating with us and going forward." The PAB, the George Floyd Transparency Project, costs money. And obviously, we're doing it for a year. We're a nonprofit group that's lifting it up. We very much would like to have you meet with the person in California who's originally from Maryland, who put this particular project together, and see whether it's something that you guys could adopt and recommend to county government. So again, thank you for this opportunity to share these views.
Thank you so much for that information and that background. Are there any questions from board members? All right, well, I don't see any hands up, any questions. Thank you again for taking the time to meet with us this evening and to share your perspective from the Caucus of African American Leaders. We do greatly appreciate you taking the time and sharing that perspective. And we look forward to, continued conversations and collaboration. You are welcome to stay, but we will not take it personally if you don't. Thank you.
I will ask though, to make sure I'm real clear, this is a formal request to the PAB to take a look at the George Floyd Transparency, to look at the author who brought this up on board, and to give us a response. Because I think it's important that the community knows you're listening and you're responding. Now, obviously, it's up to you as to how you respond, but we very much would appreciate getting a response to that specific request. And Cedric, thank you for raising the question as to what the PAB could do if legislation did not pass. And I think Amy is right. A lot of things that's before the General Assembly probably will not pass. But this is a project that could be easily assumed, because you don't need new powers to do this. This particular project could be undertaken with the powers you currently have.
Yes, thank you. We have absolutely noted that request and we'll certainly follow up with you on that.
Thank you again. Have a good
Thank you. Have a good evening. All right, so that concludes our presentations this evening. And as we've discussed in the past, and as the PAB members have expressed an interest in hearing from members from the community, particularly those groups and organizations that were instrumental and involved in police reform around the state and in the county. And so we will continue to invite folks, and we have other guests coming, I believe next month and in June. So we will continue to invite members of the public and community organizations to come, speak with us and share their perspectives. All right, so next on the agenda, I have my written agenda, but I keep losing the agenda. But I think is it new business?
Business, then announcements.
Announcements, okay. All right, so I have announcements next.
New business before announcements.
Oh, new business, got it. We don't have any new business. Unless anybody else.
Announcements.
I don't think we have any new business. I don't know if anybody else had any new business. No, okay. I think we're good there. We're taking a breather from the annual report that we all worked on. Okay, so I think we're good with that. So then moving on to announcements. I don't know if Ms. Panda or Ms. Rogers have anything for us. I have my announcement, but you both are good? Okay.
Anything other than the next meeting is March 25th.
Yep, that was going to be my announcement. Yep, the next meeting of the board is scheduled for Monday, March 25th, also at 6:30 p.m. So we look forward to seeing everyone there. And if there aren't any questions or comments from board members, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I have a question, but I'll
Okay.
answer.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So how do I say this? Presentations tonight were wonderful. I think, again, community is asking us to engage, and I have been thinking about the in between the meetings, right? What's the work of the PAB? And so is there in between the meeting work that we could engage in that, would be some meaningful work and in our lane of doing? Just something to think about. You don't have to answer it, but just something to think about. What is that in between meetings that we could engage in that is in our lane?
Thanks, Sean. No, I appreciate that. And I know we've talked about different ways that we'd like to engage the community more. And I think, at least from my perspective, it hasn't been as easy as I thought it was going to be. I think in some instances, at least for me, I can speak for myself, I was expecting perhaps folks would be more interested in having us come, to their meetings and things of that nature, but there hasn't necessarily been a request for those things a little bit early on, right? And so certainly, we'll continue to look at, I know, Miss Panda, Miss Rogers have looked at like different events and things of that nature. So we'll continue to look at that. And we've asked the law enforcement agencies, so we can certainly remind them at the next meeting to hey, give us a heads up when you have something going on within the community. We've asked the various organizations that have come before us, will come before us, the same, if there's ever an opportunity for us to go and just even observe, right? Like we don't have to speak, but just to observe. And I know some folks have done things on their own. So we will certainly continue to look into that. Anybody have any ideas? By all means, please share. And then we can look at, potential opportunities and, whether we need to, create an opportunity outside, of the meeting times. So thank you for bringing that up because I think, we've all expressed an interest in being more involved and engaged with the community at large. So that's a very valid point. And we'll continue to ask, community leaders, etc. But if you all, get anything that comes your way that you think might be of interest to the board, share it with Jen, and she can, kind of share it, and Moya, and they can share it with us. But we can, any ideas, any brainstorming, we will accept all of it to figure out, how we can be more engaged on the ground. So I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of your evening. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.